The storm had rolled in before dawn, rattling the windows of Hannah's small apartment and soaking the streets until they gleamed like broken mirrors. By the time she stepped outside, the sky was a bruised gray, heavy with more rain, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and gasoline. She held her folder tight to her chest as though it were her lifeline, because it was. Inside lay her carefully prepared resume, her certificates, and the data analysis projects she'd taught herself to build after months of being locked out of the job market. This morning wasn't just another interview. It was the interview, her chance to finally cross the line between desperation and stability. Backhand index pointing right, and if you've ever felt that tension, that single day that could define the rest of your life, then you know what Hannah carried with her into the storm. Keep watching, because what happened in the next few minutes would test everything she believed about herself, about sacrifice, and about what it really means to be ready for opportunity. Hannah adjusted the strap of her bag and glanced at her phone, 8:15 a.m. She had exactly 45 minutes to cross the city and reach the tall glass building downtown where a prestigious company was waiting. She had rehearsed answers for days, practiced in the mirror until she could recite her strengths and weaknesses in her sleep. Her blazer was modest but professional, a second-hand purchase she'd ironed 3 times last night just to keep the shoulders sharp. Today, she was determined to look like she belonged in that office. But as she hurried down the rain-slick sidewalk, a shape in her peripheral vision made her stop. A man, middle-aged, his suit already clinging to him from the rain, staggered once, twice, and then crumpled onto the concrete. His briefcase skidded a few feet away, splashing into a shallow puddle. For a moment, everything slowed. Commuters around her kept moving, umbrellas tilted, headphones in, eyes locked forward. One man glanced down, shook his head almost dismissively, and walked on. Another woman pulled her daughter closer and veered around the collapsed figure like he was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. Hannah froze in place, her heart hammering. No. Not now. Please, God, not now. Every rational part of her brain screamed for her to keep walking. To get to the subway, to catch the train, to make that interview. She had clawed her way here, switching careers after her nursing degree had landed her nothing but rejection letters, teaching herself spreadsheets, coding, analytics tools while her friends moved on with their lives. One mistake, one delay, and this shot would vanish like all the others. Her hand tightened on her folder. You can't risk this. You've worked too hard. But then she looked at the man again. His chest rose shallowly. His lips moved, barely forming a sound. A wet cough rattled his throat, and his hand twitched weakly against the pavement, reaching for help that never came. Hannah's legs moved before her brain made the decision. She splashed across the sidewalk, kneeling beside him as the rain plastered her hair to her face. "Sir, can you hear me?" she shouted, her voice trembling. His eyes fluttered open for a second, unfocused, then rolled back. Panic surged in her chest. She knew the signs, something was wrong, terribly wrong. She leapt up, waving frantically at the passing street traffic. "Help! Please, somebody, help us!" A yellow taxi slowed for half a second before speeding up again. Another swerved around the puddle and disappeared into the rain. Pedestrians glanced, shook their heads, and hurried faster, avoiding the mess of responsibility lying on the sidewalk. Hannah felt a bitter anger rise in her chest. How can they all just walk away? She tried again, arms waving desperately. He needs a hospital. Please. Nothing. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down, and that was when she saw it. The man's own phone lay half in his palm, the screen glowing faintly through the drizzle. A notification pulsed on the lock screen, "Your Uber has arrived." Her heart jolted. She twisted her head just in time to see a black sedan pulling up across the street, its headlights slicing through the storm. Without thinking, she hooked her arms under the man's shoulders, gritting her teeth as she dragged him toward the curb. He was heavier than he looked, every inch of movement soaking her further as water seeped into her shoes and blazer. The driver jumped out, eyes wide. What happened? He collapsed, Hannah gasped, pushing the man into the back seat with the driver's help. Hospital, nearest one. Now. She was about to climb in after him when dread hit her like a punch. Her folder. Her documents. If they got ruined in this chaos, she'd have nothing to show at the interview. Her fingers shook as she unzipped her bag and shoved the folder deep into the man's leather briefcase lying beside him. She whispered under her breath, "Please, just stay safe." The driver slammed the door shut, the wipers squealing against the downpour as the car pulled into traffic. Hannah sat with the unconscious man's head against her shoulder, every second ticking louder in her mind. 8:30, 8:40. 8:50. Her throat tightened. Each red light was another nail in the coffin of her dream. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the city blur past through sheets of rain. She thought of her cramped apartment, of the rejection emails still sitting unopened in her inbox, of the nights she'd cried over online tutorials, teaching herself a world that had seemed closed to her. She thought of her parents' voices on the phone, encouraging but heavy with doubt, "Are you sure this career switch is worth it?" And now, she thought bitterly, she might not even get the chance to prove it was. The hospital lights glowed ahead like a beacon, and Hannah exhaled in relief as nurses rushed to take the man from her arms. She stepped back, soaked and trembling, her blazer clinging like a second skin. For a moment, she just stood there, rain dripping off her chin, her heart torn between guilt and a strange calm. She had chosen. Chosen to save a stranger instead of herself. When the man disappeared through the sliding doors, she pulled his bag close, retrieved her folder, and clutched it like a shield. Her phone buzzed again. 9:10 a.m. Her stomach sank. The interview. She turned and bolted back into the rain, shoes slapping against the pavement, lungs burning. Every second mattered now, but deep down she knew, something irreversible had already been set in motion. By the time Hannah reached the office district, the storm had weakened to a drizzle, but the city still dripped with the weight of the morning rain. Streams of water slid along the sidewalks, glistening like silver veins beneath the streetlights, and cars splashed past, tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Hannah's chest burned with each breath as she sprinted the last block, her folder clutched desperately in her hands. The building towered above her, all steel and glass, its sleek facade reflecting a sky still swollen with gray clouds. This was the kind of place she had dreamed of working in, professional, sharp, untouchable. The kind of place where people in pressed suits carried lanyards and confidence in equal measure. She stood at the foot of the steps for a moment, drenched and trembling, trying to gather the composure she'd lost in the chaos of the morning. Her phone buzzed again. 9:20 a.m. She had already missed it. Her stomach dropped, but she pushed forward anyway, climbing the marble steps, her wet shoes squeaking with each movement. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished floors and bright lighting. A fountain trickled softly in the corner, and the air carried a faint scent of fresh coffee. Hannah felt every pair of eyes on her as she entered, a young woman dripping water onto the floor, her blazer wrinkled and damp, her hair clinging to her face. The security guard leaned back in his chair as she approached. His uniform was crisp, his expression sharper than the edges of his badge. He gave her a long look, then raised his brows. "Interview was at 9, he said flatly. His voice carried no sympathy, only judgment. "Do you even check the time?" Hannah's lips parted, her voice trembling as she tried to answer. There was." But he was already shaking his head, waving a hand to dismiss her excuse before she could even form it. He pointed toward the front desk with a jerk of his chin. "Reception. Over there." The sting of his words burned hotter than the rain had. Hannah swallowed hard and forced her legs forward. She reminded herself that it didn't matter what he thought. The guard wasn't the one making decisions about her future. She still had a chance, she had to believe that. The receptionist looked up as she approached, her manicured fingers pausing over the keyboard. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Hannah's soaked clothes and pale, anxious face. For a fleeting second, her smile was warm, almost encouraging. But then her words came, soft yet sharp enough to cut. "You're very late." Hannah tightened her grip on her folder, trying to steady her voice. "I know. I just—" The woman leaned closer, lowering her voice to a tone laced with pity that felt more like mockery. "Honestly? They don't usually wait. I doubt they'll see you now." She paused, her lips curling into something between sympathy and dismissal. "But, you could try your luck. Try your luck." As if this wasn't her career, her life, her one chance. As if this interview was a raffle ticket she had already lost. Hannah's throat tightened, but she forced a nod. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. She turned and walked down the corridor the receptionist had indicated. Each step echoed too loudly in the pristine space, her wet shoes leaving faint prints on the polished tiles. When she reached the waiting area, her heart clenched. The candidates sat in neat rows, a small army of ambition. Their suits were sharp, their shoes polished, their hair perfectly styled. They looked like they belonged there, like they had been preparing for this moment all their lives. Hannah, soaked and disheveled, felt like an intruder. A man in a navy suit glanced up at her, his eyes narrowing before he leaned toward the woman beside him. She covered her mouth with her hand as she whispered back, her eyes flicking to Hannah, then away again with a smirk. Another candidate glanced at her folder, at her damp blazer, and gave a small shake of his head. Heat crept up Hannah's neck, but she sat anyway, perching on the edge of a chair. Water seeped into the fabric beneath her, but she kept her back straight, clutching her folder so tightly her knuckles whitened. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to remind herself of the hours she had poured into online tutorials, late nights learning SQL commands, afternoons practicing data visualization on her borrowed laptop. She wasn't just some unprepared girl. She had worked for this. She deserved a chance. But the silence in the waiting room pressed in on her, heavy and suffocating. The door to the conference room opened, and a tall man in a dark gray suit stepped out, clipboard in hand. His expression was efficient, detached, the kind of look that had no patience for wasted time. He scanned the room, his gaze brushing over Hannah as though she were invisible. "Mark Anderson," he called. A candidate stood, adjusting his tie, and walked briskly into the room. The door closed behind him, and the waiting room fell silent again. One by one, the names were called. Each time the door opened, another polished candidate disappeared inside. Each time, Hannah's heart sank a little further. She sat there, waiting, her name never called, her pulse pounding in her ears. When the last person had gone in, Hannah stood slowly, her legs stiff, her throat dry. She approached the man with the clipboard, her voice trembling. "Excuse me, my name is Hannah Davis. I had an interview scheduled at 9. He didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on the paper in front of him, his pen scratching across it. "You were late," he said coldly. "We've filled the slot." Hannah's lips parted. "Please, if I could just—" The man shook his head sharply, still not meeting her eyes. "It's over." Her chest ached, but no words came. She stood there for a moment, folder clutched in her trembling hands, before she finally nodded and stepped back. The rejection was final. As she walked back down the corridor, the receptionist's faint smile lingered in her mind, polite, practiced, and utterly empty. Hannah pushed through the glass doors and back into the drizzle. The rain welcomed her like an old enemy, soaking her again as she walked down the steps. By the time she reached her apartment, her legs felt like lead. The small space was warm and dry, but it did nothing to ease the chill in her bones. Carla, her roommate, looked up from the couch as Hannah stepped inside, her eyes hopeful. "So? How was it?" Hannah's throat tightened. She forced a smile, brittle and hollow. "I lost it." Carla frowned. That's it? What happened? Hannah shook her head, dropping her bag onto the table. It doesn't matter. She walked straight to her room, closed the door behind her, and leaned against it. The weight of the morning pressed down like 1,000 pounds. She slid to the floor, her folder still clutched in her hands, her eyes burning with unshed tears. For the first time that day, she let the storm inside her break. Silent sobs shook her chest, her tears mixing with the dampness on her skin. She had done the right thing. She had saved a man's life. And yet, here she was, alone in her room, punished for it. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, her voice a whisper to no one. Was it worth it? No answer came. Only silence. The storm had ended days ago, but inside Hannah's small apartment, it felt like the rain had never stopped. The sound of water dripping from the kitchen tap filled the silence, steady and mocking, as though counting down each second of another wasted day. She sat hunched at her desk, the blue glow of her laptop washing over her face, scanning yet another job board. The screen felt endless, listings blurred into one another, each one demanding more experience than she had, more credentials than she could offer. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad, scrolling past positions labeled data analyst, minimum 5 years experience. She had none. She scrolled past SQL expert, graduate degree preferred. She didn't. She scrolled past analytics consultant, portfolio required. She had projects, yes, but self-taught, stitched together from free courses and sleepless nights, fragile in the face of competition. Still, she applied. She uploaded her resume again and again, tweaking words, reshaping sentences, convincing herself that if she hit submit enough times, something would change. But her inbox told another story. Each morning, she woke to the same chorus of rejection emails. We regret to inform you. Thank you for applying, but unfortunately, we have chosen to move forward with other candidates. She stopped opening them after the first line. They all said the same thing. She started dragging them straight into a folder she bitterly named No. Carla, her roommate, noticed the heaviness settling around her. One evening, as Hannah sat staring blankly at her laptop, Carla leaned against the doorway. Any luck today? She asked gently. Hannah forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Still looking. Carla tilted her head, studying her. You're working too hard. Maybe take a break for a day. Clear your mind. I can't, Hannah whispered, eyes fixed on the screen. If I stop, I'll fall behind. And I'm already behind. Carla didn't push. She just sighed, muttered something about making tea, and left her to the silence. At night, the silence grew heavier. Hannah lay awake in the dark, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying the storm in her mind. She saw the man collapse again and again, heard the thunder crack as she dragged him through the rain. Sometimes in her dreams, she saved him. Sometimes she didn't, and woke with guilt choking her throat. But the worst dreams were of the waiting room. The receptionist's pitying smile. The smirks of the other candidates. The clipboard man's voice saying, "It's over." She woke from those dreams drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. One morning, a week after the failed interview, she sat at the table with her cold coffee untouched, scrolling through job postings again. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She almost ignored it, calls rarely brought good news, but something in her gut made her pick it up. Hello, is this Hannah Davis? The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Hannah straightened in her chair. Yes, this is she. This is Anderson and Company. We've reviewed your application. The hiring manager has shown interest in meeting you. Would you be available for an interview tomorrow morning at 10? For a second, Hannah thought she had misheard. Her mouth went dry, words tangling on her tongue. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? The voice chuckled softly. We'd like to invite you to interview for the data analyst position. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at our main office. Does that work for you? Hannah's heart pounded so hard it drowned out the sound of the dripping faucet. Yes, she breathed. Then louder, yes, absolutely. Thank you. Wonderful. We'll see you then. When the line went dead, Hannah sat frozen, her phone still pressed to her ear. For the first time in days, the silence around her didn't feel heavy, it felt alive, charged with possibility. She let out a shaky laugh, covering her mouth with one hand. The rest of the day blurred. She pulled her blazer from the back of her closet. The fabric still bore faint creases from the storm, but she laid it flat on the ironing board, running the iron carefully over every wrinkle. She polished her shoes until they caught the light. She spread her folder open on the table, reviewing her resume, her projects, her certificates. Late into the night, she stood before the mirror, rehearsing answers to questions that might come. Tell me about yourself. Why analytics? What sets you apart from other candidates? She spoke until her voice grew hoarse, until the lines no longer sounded rehearsed but lived in, like truth. She didn't tell Carla. She didn't want to jinx it, didn't want hope to grow so big it would crush her if it failed. This was her secret flame, fragile and private. As she set her alarm, her reflection stared back at her, tired eyes, determined jaw, a woman who had been knocked down but not destroyed. She whispered to herself, tomorrow, it has to be different. But what she couldn't know, what no amount of preparation could tell her, was that tomorrow would not just be different. Tomorrow would be the day everything changed. The morning air felt different that day. Crisp, clear, alive. Hannah stood on the subway platform, blazer pressed tight against her shoulders, folder tucked securely in her arms. The noise of the city around her, train wheels screeching, voices echoing off tiled walls, footsteps hurrying in every direction, faded beneath the roar of her own heartbeat. Today was a second chance, one she hadn't expected, one she couldn't waste. As the train rattled along, she rehearsed quietly to herself, her lips moving with each line she practiced in the mirror the night before. Why analytics? Because numbers tell stories, and stories drive change. What sets you apart? I taught myself when no one else believed I could. Her reflection in the subway window stared back at her, serious, determined, a little nervous but stronger than the woman who had walked into that storm a week ago. When she emerged onto the busy street, the Anderson and Company building rose before her, sleek and silver against the bright morning sky. Its mirrored panels reflected the clouds drifting lazily above, as if the building itself lived above ordinary worries. Hannah paused on the sidewalk, tilting her head back to take it in. She whispered under her breath, "You belong here." Then she squared her shoulders and pushed forward. The revolving doors spun her into a lobby that felt more like another world. The floor gleamed under the soft glow of pendant lights, and the air smelled faintly of espresso and leather. Men and women in tailored suits moved with purpose, their polished shoes clicking like metronomes across the marble. A receptionist with perfect posture and an immaculate bun greeted her with a professional smile. "Good morning. Name?" "Hannah Davis." I have an interview." The receptionist scanned her list, nodded. "Yes, Ms. Davis. Please have a seat. Someone will be out to escort you." Hannah crossed to the waiting area, her heels clicking faintly. She perched on the edge of a leather chair, folder balanced on her knees, hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. Her eyes roamed the lobby, the polished company logo etched in silver across the far wall, the receptionist's effortless smile, the security guard scanning badges with quiet authority. Every detail screamed success, competence, confidence. Her phone buzzed in her bag. A text from Carla, "Good luck today. You got this." Hannah smiled faintly, her throat tightening. She hadn't told Carla much about this interview, just enough. Somehow, she didn't want to share the fragile hope too widely. Minutes stretched. The sound of a fountain bubbling in the corner filled the silence between her racing thoughts. Then, Miss Davis. She turned. A woman in a navy skirt suit, tablet in hand, stood nearby with a polite smile. The hiring manager will see you now. Hannah rose quickly, her knees threatening to wobble, but she steadied herself and followed. The hallway stretched long and bright, lined with glass offices. Inside, professionals sat hunched over laptops, their voices low as they discussed charts and numbers Hannah longed to understand. She glimpsed one wall lined with framed awards, each plaque polished to perfection. The escort stopped at a door near the end of the hall. Please, wait inside. He'll be with you shortly. Would you like anything while you wait? Coffee? Water? Juice? Juice, please. Thank you. The woman nodded, opened the door for her, and disappeared. The office was spacious, lined with tall windows that let the morning light stream across the carpet. Bookshelves flanked the walls, filled with thick volumes and company binders. A desk sat neatly arranged, laptop, stacks of paper, a framed picture of a family smiling on a beach. The room carried the faint scent of cedarwood, masculine but refined. Hannah sat carefully in the chair across from the desk. She laid her folder on her lap, smoothing its edges over and over, her palms damp despite herself. She glanced at the clock, 10:07 a.m. She whispered, "Stay calm. Stay focused." The minutes dragged. Each tick of the clock grew louder, pressing against her nerves. She forced herself to breathe slowly, rehearsing her answers again in her head. Then the door opened. Hannah looked up, and the air left her lungs. The man who stepped in wore a tailored navy suit that fit him like it was cut from his own ambition. His posture was tall, his stride purposeful, his presence filling the room before he even reached the desk. His face was calm, composed, until his eyes landed on her. Her heart jolted. Recognition hit like a lightning strike. She knew that face. She had seen it pale and drained of life, lips blue under the pounding rain, eyes rolling back as his body collapsed onto wet pavement. She had knelt beside him, begged for help, dragged him through the storm into a waiting car. She had held his head against her shoulder, whispering, "Please, just breathe." Now he stood alive before her, strong, commanding. The hiring manager. Her pulse roared in her ears. She gripped her folder so hard the edges bent. For a long moment, silence filled the office. His eyes widened, his mouth parting slightly as recognition dawned. He blinked, disbelief flashing across his face before something softer, gratitude, awe, settled in. "It's you," he said finally, his voice low, almost reverent. "The woman from that storm." Hannah's throat tightened. She managed a whisper. "Yes." He crossed the room slowly, lowering himself into the chair behind the desk. His gaze never left her. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the polished wood as though anchoring himself to the moment. "I remember," he said, his tone heavy. "I collapsed. The world went dark. And when I woke up in that hospital bed, the nurse told me a stranger had carried me through the rain. You refused to leave me. That stranger was you." Hannah's chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. Words tangled in her throat. "I never even got to thank you," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't even know your name." "Hannah," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Hannah Davis." He repeated it softly, as if committing it to memory. "Hannah Davis." He sat back, shaking his head in disbelief. "What are the chances that you'd walk into my office today?" Her hands shook in her lap. She swallowed hard. I almost didn't." He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "But you did. And now I understand why." He glanced at the folder clutched in her hands. "You came here for an interview." She nodded, unable to speak. His lips curved into a faint smile, though his eyes remained serious. "Hannah, I need you to know something. Whatever happens in this room, your character, it speaks louder than any resume, louder than any skill on paper. You showed me who you are when the world looked away. Hannah's chest tightened, her heart slamming against her ribs. The silence stretched between them, charged and unspoken, like the air before a storm breaks. She didn't know what he would say next. But she knew one thing, the choice she made in the rain had followed her here, into this very room, and nothing would ever be the same again. The room seemed to shrink around Hannah as she sat across from the man she had saved. The weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders, but not in the way rejection had done so many times before. This time, it wasn't despair that filled her, it was disbelief, hope, and the strange sense that her life was about to change in ways she had never dared imagine. The manager leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his gaze steady. "You know, I've been through plenty of interviews," he said, his voice low but firm. "I've seen candidates who could recite textbooks. I've seen resumes stacked with degrees and accolades. But do you know what none of them have shown me?" Hannah swallowed, her hands trembling in her lap. "What's that?" He paused, his lips curving into something that was neither a smile nor a frown but carried the weight of truth. "Heart. The courage to do the right thing when it costs you everything. The ability to see another human being in need, and to act." Her throat tightened, tears threatening again. He reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn around the edges. He laid it on the desk and slid it toward her. With careful fingers, Hannah unfolded it, and her breath caught. It was her resume, the one she had tucked into his bag that stormy morning. The paper was warped with faint water stains, the ink slightly smudged, but it was undeniably hers. "I found this," he explained. "At first, I couldn't remember how it got there. But then it hit me, you were the one who slipped it into my bag that day. Even in chaos, you protected your dream." He shook his head in disbelief. "That said more to me than any interview ever could." Hannah's chest constricted. She had thought of that moment countless times, whether hiding her resume had been foolish, whether it had been wasted. And here it was, lying before her like proof that even the smallest act had meaning. The manager sat back, his eyes never leaving hers. "You studied nursing, didn't you?" "Yes," Hannah whispered. "But after graduation, I couldn't find work. I started teaching myself data analytics online, taking free courses, practicing with whatever tools I could access. I thought if I kept trying, someone would give me a chance." His lips pressed together in thought. "You taught yourself? Alone?" She nodded. "That," he said firmly, "is rare. It takes discipline, resilience, and grit. The kind of grit that pulled me off the sidewalk when everyone else walked past." Hannah blinked rapidly, her vision blurring. She wasn't used to hearing words like that directed at her. He leaned forward again, his voice carrying weight. "So here's what we're going to do. I want you on my team. Not just as another analyst buried in spreadsheets. I want you as my personal assistant. Someone I can trust, someone I know will stand firm when things get tough. It'll be demanding, yes. But the salary will be better than what you'd earn starting in analytics. And the exposure, the people you'll meet, the things you'll learn, it will open doors you haven't even imagined yet." For a moment, Hannah couldn't breathe. "You're offering me the job?" He smiled faintly. "No, Hannah. I'm giving it to you. Because you already earned it." The dam inside her broke. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she pressed a hand over her mouth. Weeks of rejection, months of silent doubt, nights of lonely studying, all of it came rushing back in a flood of emotion. She had been convinced her sacrifice had destroyed her future, and now, here was proof that it had saved it instead. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. "Thank you so much." The manager stood and came around the desk, extending his hand. His grip was steady, grounding her as she rose on trembling legs. "No," he said gently. "Thank you. For choosing humanity when the world told you to choose ambition. For reminding me what really matters. Hannah let out a shaky laugh through her tears. I thought I ruined everything that day. You didn't ruin anything, he said. You revealed who you are. And that's worth more than any degree, any polished resume. The moment stretched between them, filled with something bigger than gratitude. It was a recognition, a quiet understanding that lives had intersected for a reason. When Hannah finally left the office, the world outside seemed transformed. The sunlight bounced off the glass towers, bathing the street in a golden glow. The air felt lighter, fresher. Even the rush of traffic sounded different, like music instead of noise. She walked slowly, almost afraid the ground beneath her might vanish if she moved too quickly. The receptionist's polite smile as she exited lingered behind her, but Hannah barely noticed. She was too lost in the realization that everything had shifted. On the sidewalk, she paused, tilting her head back to the sky. For so long, she had carried the weight of rejection, of doubt, of silence. Now she carried something new, proof that kindness had power, that sacrifice wasn't wasted, that character could open doors qualifications couldn't. She clutched her folder to her chest, whispering into the breeze, "This is just the beginning." The city bustled around her, horns honking, footsteps rushing, voices rising, but inside her, there was stillness, a peace she hadn't known in years. The storm had tried to break her, but it had only delivered her to the place she was meant to be. And as she walked down the street, her tears drying in the sunlight, one truth anchored itself deep in her heart: sometimes, the greatest opportunities don't come when you chase them, they come when you stop to help someone else. Backhand index pointing right. If this story moved you, remember this: the choices you make when no one is watching can become the very keys that unlock your future. So never underestimate the power of kindness, because one act of compassion might change not just someone else's life, but yours too.